I'm going to show you in this video the process of tearing down a 2.3 Ecoboost engine on a Ford Explorer to inspect the head gasket. Customer came in complaining about a misfire. I found there was coolant intrusion on cylinder number 1, and I'm just going to bring you along to show you what it all takes to disassemble the 2.3 engine all the way down to the head and removing the head, and to see why there's coolant intrusion, either a head gasket failure or a short block failure. So I already drained my coolant, I already drained my oil, and I did an evac system on my AC. My plan of attack on this is probably removing the cowl, so I get access to the turbo, remove the turbo, charge pipes, intake, valve cover, and then finish off with doing the timing, and then of course removing the cylinder head. So let's get started. Now this thing should just come right out, this whole assembly. So you gotta make sure you disconnect this pipe, and there's 2 little harness clips that goes onto these studs, and disconnect that connector, and then of course your clamps right here. So let me go ahead and remove that bolt that's holding those 2 lines, and then that hose that's right there where my light's flashing, and then the oil supply, the bottom oil return, and then I should be able to remove those 4 turbo bolts. So let's go do that real quick. So I got the turbo positioned out of the way from the cylinder head. I did have to remove the 2 nuts back there from the bottom that's connecting the cat to the exhaust system. So just remove those 2 nuts, and then that should give you enough play to move this turbo out. And then of course if you're replacing the turbo, you could just take your 2 nuts here, and then the turbo should come out, and place the rag in here so no debris or fluid enters the turbo. I probably should put some rags in here, but overall the exhaust side of the cylinder head is done. So let's move on to the intake. Okay, so let's go ahead and remove, or not remove, but loosen up these water pump hoses. So I got those water pump bolts loosened. Now I'm just going to get my ratchet on this tensioner pulley and take this belt off. And then I'll just leave the belt on for there, and then I'll take it off when I'm ready to take it off. So let's go ahead and remove the tensioner. And the tensioner is now off. Okay, cool. Now this piece should all come out, and this whole evap hose assembly is off. Now this clip right here, that is a vacuum line. It's a very interesting way to disconnect this one. So what you have to do is push this line in, and with the pocket screwdriver push that red clip in, and then it somehow disengages the line. So let's see if I can do it real quick. I'm going to push it in, push this red clip, and this line should disconnect. So you're just pushing this line in, and you're holding the red piece from moving with the line, and then it should just come out very easily. So I got that pipe loosened up, go around here and Let's get our pick in there and loosen up pipe just to break that seal up. Sometimes it really gets stuck in there. And this should just pop right off. Yep, nice and easy. Cool. So now once we got mostly everything disconnected from the intake, of course you gotta disconnect your, I think this is the map sensor. We have two more hidden connections behind the intake that we gotta remove, but we're gonna go ahead and just loosen up the intake, pull it out, and then go from there. So we got these 5 bolts removed. I had to give it a good wiggle to actually break the seal on the intake, and as you can see, it is still connected. So we're going to get back here. So once you got this connector mount disconnected, and then this one disconnected, and then this hose disconnected, this whole intake is not going to come out because I forgot to disconnect the actual throttle body connector. Okay, once that is disconnected, now this intake should come right out. Let's disconnect this connector, and then we can pull this shield off, pull this clip back. Let me get on this side. Push this line in. Okay, I had to use a little extra force, but now this line should come right off, and we can set this to the side. The flitter nut, we can just disconnect that. So let's remove these two 10 mils on top to remove this bracket. Now this bracket should come right out. Yeah, a couple more clips. Okay, 2 bolts removed. This pump should come right out. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab this bucket that sits inside of the cam. You could, if you're not removing the head, you can leave this in, but I don't want to lose this, and I'm removing the head, so I'm just going to keep this together. So now let's work on this vacuum pump. So let's go ahead and disconnect this quick disconnect, and disconnect this other connector to the actual pump. We'll set that to the side. You got to be very careful with these lines. They are very brittle, and just enough pressure and bending it, they could crack, and you could have a very hard to find vacuum leak. So be careful with that line. I think this only has 1, 2, 3 8mm bolts holding this pump in, and this pump should just come right out. But let's go ahead and remove this clip right here to give us enough room right here. We'll grab our ratchet and start loosening up these bolts. Let's do bolts, and this is it. Yep, and it came off pretty easily. Careful with the seal. Now we could take this line off. This high pressure fuel line. I didn't know there was a hidden 8mm bolt holding that line in, so let's just set this to the side. And now we got this line out of the way. So I got that line off of the cylinder head. I just came in with this and just worked it up. This line should now be freely movable, and I'll just set this over here. And now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 13 millimeters. We got these 4 stud bolts out, and now this dry pump should come right off. Cool. So just a little quick overview of what we've done so far. We removed the exhaust turbo manifold and put that to the side. We of course removed the intake and set that to the side. We removed the accessory drives on the back of the head off. And so now we are going to be working on the valve cover. So first things first is probably disconnecting all the electrical connectors and setting the harness to the sides. Disconnect. That connector, cam position sensors. Now I've got most of the connectors disconnected. I'm probably just going to disconnect from here. And to remove this, there's just these 2 little push pins on the side. This should slide right out. And let's go ahead and disconnect the PCM. And now just disconnect this other connector. And now, once I disconnect all the boost controls down here, this harness should just flip over and be out of my way. But I got enough room now to go ahead and start working on this valve cover. Before I remove these coil packs, I'm going to go ahead and mark them. 1, 2, 3, 4, because I know these things are super duper sensitive, and just in case anything goes wrong while I start the vehicle and it is not running right, I know that I'm consistent with putting everything back together and can minimize something else going wrong. Because Ford coil packs are just weird. We'll go ahead and remove our dipstick. Break that seal. You gotta be very careful prying right here. I know there's a gap right here that you might think it will be very easy to get this in here, but these are very easy to break. So and now valve cover is off. And now let's go ahead and remove the fuel rail. So we just gotta remove this little shield. Cool. Now the injectors are out. So before we do anything with the front side, let's go ahead and get our back cam of the intake all set up for the timing tool. So the first step is to remove this cap, which is just 2 10 mils. And now we got this cam off, or cam cap. We'll set this to the side. It's a hex 17, which you got to remove this little piece right here, and then you'll hold the cam with a wrench to remove this back piece. And now that piece is off. Okay, so now we are actually ready to time the engine. This is a very crucial part in this procedure. These 1.5, 2 liters, 2.3 are keyless crank. So if the crank comes misaligned with the top end, then it's bad news. You're going to have to do a lot more work to fix it, and if you don't fix it, you're basically replacing an engine, because this is an interference engine. So this is a very specific timing procedure for this engine. Down below, to get number 1 to top that center, that pin, that circle on the crank, has to be 45 degrees before that circle on the timing cover. So there's 2 circles, the one on the crank and one on the timing cover. The one on the crank has to be 45 degrees before that center one, that center circle on the timing cover. You also have to make sure you're not 180 degrees out. You can be 180 degrees out and still mess up this engine. So double check that you're not 180 degrees out. You come to the top and look at your cams. Make sure your intake cam lobes are past the valves, meaning if your intake cams are like right here, that means if you rotate the engine anymore, you're on the intake stroke. There's 4 strokes: intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. To double make sure you're not 180 degrees out, you want your intake lobes already past your valves, and then your exhaust lobes ready to come up on the valves. So you can see my exhaust lobes are ready to go over the valves, and my intakes already past the valves. And so I have this already set, which is I already know I'm on the compression stroke, because my intake stroke happened, I'm on the compression stroke, combustion's next, and then the exhaust. Once you know you're on the compression stroke, you also can check back here with that line, and that line on the back of the cam will be parallel to the top surface of the cylinder head. So you double check that you're on a compression stroke, and your circle on your crank, the timing mark, is before top dead center. The next step is to remove that timing peg. So let's see if I can remove it real quick. I loosened it up. So this timing peg comes out. You have to remove this to time the engine. You gotta lock the crank. But the timing peg comes out. Then there's a timing peg, which you have to use to lock the crank. So you put this timing peg inside of the block, you turn it until it bottoms out. You have to put that peg after you set your crank, because that peg is going to lock the crank at top dead center. So now we're ready to turn this crank and get that circle aligned with that circle on the timing cover, and to verify on top that we're at top dead center. So now that we got our everything set up, I'll put my ratchet on here, and I just should rotate it, and it should just lock. It's locked. I can't rotate it anymore because that timing peg is locking that crank from rotating. So if we go up here, our extension has risen up a little bit, and I can even look on here, oops, to verify my piston is all the way up. Double check my cams, and then this timing tool back here, which is a 303 1565 would go on the back side of this cam, and it should fit perfectly, which it does.